In this video and the remainders of the videos in this module, we are going to be looking at what is called the causal interaction argument for physicalism. The basic idea of this argument is quite straightforward. It says our minds are physical. Why? Because they causally interact with the physical universe. They are affected by the physical universe. The physical universe causes all of our sensory experiences, among other things. And then our minds make things happen in the universe because we move our bodies, and our bodies then make other things happen in the universe, in the physical universe. So that's the argument in a nutshell. The question is, why would you think that if the mind causally interacts with the physical universe, then the mind has to be a physical part of the physical universe? That's the question. Why is that? Does that interaction require that the mind be physical? And that's what we'll be looking at. So we're going to start by looking at some sort of simple examples of causation. So causation is when roughly one thing's happening or several things happening make something else happen. So we have a plant, it grows. Why does it grow? Well, there are a variety of factors. They might include sunlight and water and the temperature and other factors as well, what's happening in the plant's DNA and so on. Right? Or a mug might break. We might ask why. Well, because it hit the ground at such and such velocity, and at the time at which it hit the ground was very hard and rigid, and the mug, on the other hand, was brittle, and so that meant that the collision applied a certain force to the mug's structure, and the mug wasn't strong. The mug's structure wasn't strong enough to stay in that structure. Okay, fine. So let's look at a case of behavior. So we think, here's an example. She turned the key in the ignition of the car. We ask, why did she do that? What caused her? What at previous times brought it about that this key turning happened? Well, a simple and sort of standard story, which we would usually give when we're trying to explain other people's behavior, we would talk about a mental cause. We would probably say she decided to drive to Disneyland or wherever she wanted to go. She has this decision. She's decided that's what she's going to do. And so that decision, maybe along with some other factors, but let's just focus on the decision, is the cause here for simplicity's sake. She decides, I'm going to drive to Disneyland, and that decision results in her turning the key. And that's a very straightforward explanation of the kind we're all familiar with. It's straightforward for humans. It's not straightforward for almost any other animals. Other animals don't really have very limited understandings of the fact that they're interacting with things that have minds. That's something special about humans. Anyway, you might look for a somewhat different story about, what is it that resulted in her turning the key. You might say, well, the muscles in her arms flexed and extended in the right ways, which, caused her fingers and hand to rotate in the right way, and that's what caused the key to turn. And then you might ask, well, why did the muscles in her arms and hands flex and extend in that way? You say, well, there are these neurons that are plugged into the cells, and when and those neurons release this stuff called acetylcholine, and when muscles are bathed in acetylcholine or not, then they flex or extend. And then you ask, well, why did the neurons release or not release acetylcholine? Well, because there was stuff happening in their axon with the electrical activity in the neuron itself. You ask, okay, well, why was that electrical activity happening in those neurons that innervate, that feed into those muscles? Well, because previously there was brain activity. There was neurons firing and chemical neurotransmitters released in the brain, and those the neurons in the brain and the neural structures in the brain and the neurotransmitters were attached through some long neural sequence to the neurons that feed into the muscles. So if we summarize it, we say brain state X caused the motor neuron activity, which caused the muscle activity, which caused her key turning. So what is this brain state X? Well, it would be the neural correlate of the decision, right? Remember, we think that each mental state has a neural correlate, and what is that? Well, it's the brain state that you're in when and only when you're in that mental state. And so the neural correlate of the decision would be some brain state, and part of what it is to be the neural correlate is that you have the right causes and effects. And so this neural correlate of the decision, it happens at the same time as the decision, and it initiates that process in the body that produces the hand turn. The key turning, and so on, and all of the chemical and neurological processes in between. So brain state X, it's the neural correlate of the decision. It takes place at the same time as the decision, and it causes the key turning. So now we have this question. We have these two causal stories. There's a causal story that says, what is it that produced her key turning? Her decision, I'm going to drive to Disneyland, the mental thing. Another story says, what is it that produced her key turning? Oh, the brain state, the neural correlate of the decision, that's what produced the key turning. So question, how do these two causes relate, or apparent causes relate to one another? Looks like we have two causes for the same activity. What's going on? So that's the question that we're going to have to investigate. And what this causal argument for physicalism is going to say is, once you think about this enough, what you're going to end up saying is that the only thing that could be the cause of her behavior is brain state X. And so if the neural correlate is also a cause, if the mental state is also a cause, or if the mental state is a cause of her behavior at all, it's because it's the same thing as the brain state. So that's the argument that we will be getting into in a lot more detail when it's going to be running off of thinking about these, the brain state doing the causing and the mental state doing the causing. And we will look at that in the next video.